Our story begins with a man who never expected this, a globally notorious criminal reborn into a prestigious family of high-ranking military and police officers. His grandfather and father are both senior officials. His grandmother is a renowned expert in criminal investigation, and even his mother is a world-famous forensic scientist. Being reborn into such a family brings immense pressure, but for someone who knows every criminal method by heart, it presents a unique opportunity. When we look at Chun Feng's decade-long serial killings, the bizarre elevator murders, or the global shock of the human recognition suggestion case, Yi Yang proved to everyone that he wasn't just a young master from a police dynasty. He was the king of both the criminal and investigative worlds. He rubbed his temples and set down his chopsticks, wanting a walk in the yard, but just as he reached the door, his mother rushed inside. She glanced at the breakfast on the table and smiled with satisfaction, noting that Yi Yang had finally fixed his old bad habits. She offered him a reward, and as he leaned in expectantly, she simply grabbed his face and gave it a playful, firm twist. He cried out that this reward was far too strange, but she laughed, explaining she had no time to prepare a real gift just yet. A major case had broken out in Kyoto, and she had to head back immediately. In her hurried turn toward the door, she grew careless. The files in her hand spilled across the floor. He walked over to pick them up, teasing her that his father was right about her career choice. He joked that her becoming a forensic doctor was the world's greatest miracle, given this clumsiness, exactly as his father had described it. His mother's face turned bright red as she scolded her stinking brat of a son for laughing at her, though she was still in a desperate rush. She didn't say more, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. While picking up the files, he had caught sight of a startling crime scene photo. Frowning, he told his mother, Su Wanrong, that this case wasn't simple, but she looked at him with skepticism, asking what he could possibly know. She told him to mind his own business and focus on his studies, reminding him that school was starting in just a few days. If she hadn't mentioned it, he might have forgotten that he was currently just a 17-year-old high school student facing his senior year. However, his attention remained fixed on that photo. As he examined it closely, he noted that the killer seemed disturbingly twisted. Usually, death is the end, but here, the killer had continued to use a knife on the body long after the victim had passed away. The wounds, especially those on the front, suggested a deep-seated hatred, but Su Wanrong simply shook her head, thinking he didn't understand. He noted that to his mother, this killer must look like a repeat offender, and she was likely heading upstairs to grab the files on that decade-old serial murder case. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Wanrong's eyes widened in shock, and she demanded to know how on earth he could have guessed that. He pointed out that her study was filled with organized case files, and that the serial torture murders from 10 years ago remained a painful thorn in both his parents' sides. Given the horrific state of the female victim and his mother's frantic rush upstairs, it wasn't exactly difficult to deduce she was looking for those old records. She admitted he had a surprisingly sharp mind, but challenged him to explain why he felt the killer held a personal grudge against this specific victim. In the decade-old cold case, every piece of evidence suggested the killer acted on impulse. By his logic, the knife wounds alone shouldn't rule out the original suspect. He clarified that he wasn't saying it couldn't be the same killer from 10 years ago. Perhaps that man simply had a specific grudge against this woman. He offered a small smile and said no more, content to let the observation hang in the air as he turned to leave. As he walked away, Su Wanrong suddenly stepped forward and grabbed his wrist, a bright, calculating smile spreading across her face as she called his name. She told him she needed his help, and before he could even ask what she meant, she was dragging him toward the hospital to assist with the autopsy. We see them arrive at the hospital, only to be immediately swarmed by a sea of reporters, cameras, and microphones the moment they step out. The reporters shouted over one another, asking Professor Su if she truly believed this new torture murder was the work of the same killer from a decade ago. They pressed her on the fact that the same MO had resurfaced after 10 years, reminding her of her role as the lead forensic doctor during the original investigation. It was, after all, the only case in her illustrious career where she had failed to find even a single shred of evidence leading to the killer. Surrounded by the relentless press, Su Wanrong's brow furrowed in frustration as the questions continued to pour in without pause. While the autopsy table was her domain, dealing with a pack of hungry journalists was certainly not her forte, and to be honest, the reporters weren't wrong. That cold case was the one true stain on her career. Back then, her reputation was at its peak, yet she had been left completely baffled by the killer. Just as her anger began to simmer toward the surface, a hand reached out from behind her, and Yi Yang stepped firmly in front of his mother. He pushed through anyone blocking their path, coldly reminding the crowd that the investigation takes priority over their headlines. He demanded to know what kind of report they expected so soon, noting that every second they wasted was another second the criminal had to escape. With a cold expression, Yi Yang ordered the crowd to move aside as he pulled Su Wanrong forward, leaving the reporters momentarily stunned by his intensity. Once they recovered, whispers broke out among them, with some wondering if this arrogant boy was the professor's student, while others recognized him as the young master, Yi Yang. They noted that he was simply protecting his mother, and frankly, he was right. A murder investigation must always take precedence over a news report. He pointed out that pestering them for details so early in the case was nothing more than a waste of precious time, and soon, we see them arrive at the hospital morgue. Su Wanrong pushed open the heavy doors to find several officers and forensic experts already inside, meticulously documenting the state of the body. As they entered, the staff straightened up and approached them, greeting Professor Su before pausing in surprise at the sight of her companion. They were visibly shocked to see young Master Yi there, but he merely gave a curt nod and walked straight toward the deceased woman. He began to study the victim's body with a clinical gaze, and when a few officers started to protest his proximity, Su Wanrong quickly signaled them to stay silent. After barely 30 seconds of observation, he withdrew his gaze and calmly asked where the victim's family was. An officer replied that the victim was from out of town, her family had been contacted, and was currently rushing to the capital. Yi Yang then asked about her daily life, and Su Wanrong explained that the victim was a woman named Huang Fei. She was a 27-year-old manager at a design firm who had 2 close friends in the city and lived with her fiancé. By all accounts, their relationship was excellent, but Yi Yang only gave a non-committal grunt before reaching for a pair of latex gloves. The room fell into a confused silence, and even Su Wanrong looked on with a mix of shock and concern, knowing her son had never touched a corpse before. Most people would feel a natural wave of fear or revulsion in this setting, yet he moved with the steady confidence of someone about to perform the autopsy himself. One of Su Wanrong's assistants stepped forward with a nervous smile, gently reminding Yi Yang that the preliminary examination had already been completed. He ignored the comment entirely, and despite the gruesome nature of the scene, he reached out to inspect one of the knife wounds on the woman's body. Under the astonished gaze of everyone in the room, he used 2 fingers to carefully examine the damaged tissue within the wound. Su Wanrong warned him not to push himself, fearing the sight would make him ill, but he simply let go of the tissue and stood up. He stated that the time of death was between 3:30 and 4 in the morning, and that the fatal blow had been delivered directly to the chest. He noted that a single strike had taken her life, likely caused by a dagger roughly 13 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide. However, the blade wasn't particularly sharp, suggesting frequent use. This caused the tissue around the wounds to show signs of slight tearing. The subsequent chaotic slashes grew shallower as they reached her legs, and as he finished his explanation, he turned to find everyone staring in silence. We see him offer a faint, calm smile before walking over to Su Wanrong and asking her what was wrong, as she seemed completely frozen. Wanrong reached out and squeezed his face firmly, exclaiming that she couldn't believe this was actually her son, Yi Yang. He rolled his eyes, speechless, while she insisted that her Yi Yang was supposed to be a bit clumsy, not a master of observation. She couldn't fathom how he had analyzed the wounds so perfectly in mere seconds, yet while she remained in shock, he remained focused. He turned to the veteran officer, Zhang, and requested that everyone connected to the victim be brought in to see the body one last time. Officer Zhang took a deep breath, his expression turning far more serious as he realized the weight of the young man's insights. He agreed to handle it immediately, and as Yi Yang stepped out of the room, the forensic experts and officers began to whisper fervently. They remarked that the young master had clearly learned much from the masters he grew up with, as his autopsy skills were truly humbling. To be honest, his talent was staggering. They had never seen anyone besides Professor Su or senior student Chen Feng display such precision. The fact that he identified the weapon, the fatal blow, and the time of death with just a few glances left them calling him a genius. While smiling in the presence of the deceased is usually frowned upon, we must remember that Su Wanrong is a woman long accustomed to death. In this moment, she felt nothing but immense pride, for what mother doesn't wish to see her child stand out so brilliantly? She smiled back at her colleagues, and not long after, Officer Zhang returned with those who were closest to the victim, Huang Fei. The 2 close friends and the fiancé entered the morgue together, and the sight of the body hit them all with the same crushing weight. After a moment of stunned silence, they broke into bitter sobs, especially Huang Fei's boyfriend, who seemed to lose his very soul. He collapsed onto the floor in despair, while Yi Yang stood outside the room, silently observing the trio's every reaction. When he finally stepped back inside, Wanrong leaned in and whispered, asking if he truly believed this case was linked to the events of 10 years ago. He replied that it wasn't unrelated. The most likely suspect was certainly the killer from the serial torture murder case 10 years ago. However, anyone connected to the victim remained a suspect, and with that, he walked over to the 3 grieving individuals. Fixing his gaze directly on Huang Fei's boyfriend, he asked how many years they had known each other, causing the man to hesitate for several seconds. The man finally looked up, but seeing only a teenage student, he lowered his head again. Yi Yang simply shrugged and turned to the 2 women. He asked how long they had known her, and one replied that they had been friends for 4 or 5 years and used to live together. They only moved out when Huang Fei and Li Hong reached the stage of discussing marriage. The other girl added that she couldn't believe this happened. She wondered who could be so cruel, and finally, Huang Fei's boyfriend, Li Hong, found his voice, though it trembled uncontrollably. He blamed himself, sobbing that he should have stayed with her last night and questioning why he ever left her side. He believed that if he had accompanied her home after work, this wouldn't have happened. Hearing this, Yi Yang knelt before him. He asked if she had been very busy lately, noting that she had finished work after 3 in the morning. Li Hong explained through rising emotions that she was obsessed with a design project and wouldn't listen to his pleas to rest. As Li Hong spiraled into self-reproach, Yang stood up and calmly told Officer Zhang Jian to let them go home and rest. Li Hong screamed hysterically that he wouldn't leave, crying out that they were supposed to marry in just 2 or 3 months. The officers present could only sigh in sympathy, and even Su Wanrong, who had seen so much death, let out a heavy breath. She remarked on what a pity it was, while Yang watched the entire scene with a chilling, detached composure. Having once been a criminal mastermind pursued by the world's elite agencies, no one understood the criminal mind better than he did. He knew that what the eyes see might be true, but it might also be a lie. He gave the officers a subtle nod. The officers helped Li Hong and the friends out of the room, leaving Su Wanrong to step forward and ask Yang what he felt. He didn't answer immediately, instead reaching into her file folder to pull out the set of photographs taken at the crime scene. The photos were clear from every angle, and we see him begin to lay them out in a precise, chronological sequence. After staring at the photos for 2 minutes, Yang stated with absolute certainty that this case was not the same as the serial murders from 10 years ago. As soon as he spoke, Su Wanrong and the officers were shocked once again. They argued that the methods and the sheer brutality were identical. They pointed out that the victim's back even bore the words, "I'm back," a chilling signature that seemed to mirror the past perfectly. The original killer had always left such gruesome marks, though the only difference this time was the use of words instead of numbers. In that decade-old case, every victim had been female, and every single one had been left with a specific mark carved into their back. Back then, the killer had labeled them sequentially from 9-1 to 9-2, continuing the grim count for years. The killing only stopped after the 9th victim, and hearing the officers' counterarguments now, Yang simply let out a cold, knowing smirk. He asked them if they were truly certain the level of brutality was the same, pointing out that Huang Fei had 5 fatal wounds where the entire blade had sunk in. 10 years ago, the wounds were different. The killer's cuts were seemingly random, yet the depth of each entry was remarkably consistent. The old wounds only just broke the muscle, which suggested that the previous killer was a master with a blade, likely someone whose profession required such precision. One officer instinctively argued that varying depths of wounds shouldn't be enough to rule out a connection to the original suspect. Yang explained that the original killer was brilliant, playing a calculated game with the police and the forensic teams alike. This new killer, however, was merely a crude imitator, a person desperately trying to copy a masterpiece without understanding the technique. While speaking, he reached into Su Wanrong's file and pulled out a faded, old photograph showing the back of one of the original victims. He pointed his finger at the way the victim's wrists had been bound, deciding then that he wouldn't waste any more time explaining the obvious to them. As he began to walk out, Su Wanrong called after him, asking where he was going. He simply grinned and said he had a good idea where to find the killer. We see him head directly to the company where Huang Fei had worked. Since her body was only found at dawn, the office was still unaware of the tragedy. The staff had no idea their supervisor had met such a gruesome end as Yang pushed open the doors to the design firm. It was just the start of the workday, and the employees sitting at their desks all looked exhausted, as if they had barely slept at all. They looked up at Yi Yang, Su Wanrong, and the 2 officers with complete bewilderment until one man stood up and approached them with a polite smile. The man asked the officers how he could help them, and Yi Yang stepped forward to explain they were there to discuss their manager, Huang Fei. The man's face brightened as he realized they were looking for the manager, offering to go call her since she was always the first one in the office. He was certain she was in her office, but Yi Yang stopped him firmly, stating flatly that there was no need to look because she was already dead. The man and everyone else in the office froze in absolute horror, their eyes widening as a collective cry of "what?" erupted in the room. The news sent a wave of shock through the company, and the once quiet, professional atmosphere instantly dissolved into a chaotic mess of whispers and gasps. Yi Yang scanned every face in the room while the officers behind him, worried about wasting time, called out for everyone to settle down and stay calm. They explained they were there to investigate and asked if anyone had noticed Huang Fei acting strangely lately, or if she had been in any recent conflicts. Before they could continue, Yang interrupted, suggesting that instead of motives, anyone who hadn't been in the office these past few days should step forward. Both the officers and Su Wanrong looked at him with utter confusion. To be honest, his request seemed to come completely out of left field. They wondered why he wanted to talk to those who weren't even present, especially since the killer hadn't left a single trace at the scene. Such a lack of evidence suggested a high level of counter-surveillance skill, so why would the killer leave themselves open to suspicion by being absent? Yi Yang simply smiled, claiming he was just speaking off the top of his head, and soon 3 people stepped forward, 1 young man and 2 young women. All 3 wore expressions of shock and grief, and we see that one of the girls already had eyes rimmed with red from fighting back tears. As Yi Yang approached her to speak, she finally broke down, sobbing that it was impossible for someone as kind as Sister Fei to be dead. The girl's tears wouldn't stop falling as she mourned her friend, so Yi Yang reached over to a nearby desk and grabbed a tissue for her. He handed it to her, noting that she and Huang Fei must have been close. She sniffled, explaining she was the manager's assistant and had been out sick. She told him that Huang Fei had insisted she stay home to rest, and she had only just returned to work today, only to hear this tragic news. Yang could tell the girl was indeed quite ill, as she had a persistent cough and the heavy, nasal voice that comes with a severe cold. He nodded silently and moved on to the young man, who took a deep breath and explained he had been away on a business trip and just returned. Finally, Yang turned his attention to the last girl, who seemed a bit different from the others, catching even Su Wanrong's observant eye. Su Wanrong's gaze remained fixed almost entirely on this girl, because the moment the news of Huang Fei's death was announced, her expression shifted. Although her face was filled with shock, there was a fleeting hint of satisfaction in her eyes, a dark joy that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. But it couldn't escape Su Wanrong, who had spent 20 years dealing with the dead. Her intuition told her this girl definitely had a history with Huang Fei. We see Yang also sizing up the beautiful young woman, calmly asking what business had kept her away from the office lately. She explained she had some family matters to attend to back in her hometown, and when asked how long she was gone, she replied it had been a week. Yang smiled, noting that a 7-day leave is quite substantial, and asked if something major had happened. She simply claimed she was tired and needed rest. He hummed in response and turned away, casually remarking that 7 days is just enough time for someone to study another person's methods. It is certainly enough time, he mused, to learn how to copy a specific pattern or, as they say, to follow a blueprint for a crime. As his words hung in the air, the office fell silent as everyone turned to look at the girl, whom a deputy manager identified as Jian. The manager demanded to know what he meant, so Yang described how Huang Fei was found, bound with ropes, head down, and her back stained with blood. He noted that anyone who had lived in Kyoto for over a decade would know exactly what that signature meant, and a middle-aged man's eyes suddenly went wide. The man gasped, asking if he was referring to the serial torture murder cases, and Yang confirmed that was exactly the connection. His tone grew chillingly somber as he explained that the state of Huang Fei's body was identical to the 9 victims from 10 years ago. Upon hearing this, Jian, the girl who had shown that brief flash of satisfaction, began to tremble, all traces of her secret joy replaced by pure terror. She looked up and met his gaze, her voice stuttering as she defensively asked why he was looking at her, insisting she wasn't the killer. Yang gave a cold laugh, pointing out that she clearly held a grudge. She admitted Huang Fei had slapped her once, but argued that wasn't a reason to kill. She held her head high in defiance, but Yang told her there was no need to be so agitated, as he had only said they had a grudge, not that she was the murderer. Despite his words, the weight of everyone's suspicion settled on her, and Jian's panic only grew as she looked around the room for an escape. Su Wanrong stepped closer to Yang and whispered, asking if he truly suspected her, but he replied that he was merely making an observation. He noted that when they first announced the death, her eyes looked far too delighted. For a moment, he almost believed she was the one they were looking for. I understand everything now, Yang declared, before turning to the sickly girl to ask for her name, admitting he had nearly forgotten to check. The girl shuddered, her voice coming out raspy as she identified herself as Wang Wei. He simply smiled and invited her to accompany them to the morgue. Why me? She stammered, claiming she had no grudge against Fei Fei, but Yi Yang's smile only grew more unsettling as he watched her reaction. He noted that he never mentioned a grudge. In fact, since she claimed they were so close, it was only right that she should see her friend one last time. Wang Wei eventually nodded in agreement, but as she did, Yi Yang suddenly reached out and gripped her hand with a firm, knowing smile. He told her that while everyone else might see her as a pitiable victim, he was certain that she was, in fact, the killer they were looking for. A deathly silence fell over the office as every eye fixed on Yi Yang and his grip on Wang Wei, until someone finally found the strength to speak up. A colleague insisted he must be mistaken, arguing that Wang Wei couldn't possibly be the killer if the crime matched the serial murders from a decade ago. They reasoned the killer should be the person from 10 years prior, and besides, Wang Wei seemingly had no motive to commit such a gruesome act. Others chimed in, noting she was afraid of insects, and that manager Huang had even paid off her gambling debts, a kindness that should have earned loyalty. Yi Yang's focus immediately shifted to the employee who mentioned the gambling, asking for more details about how she had fallen into that particular trap. The employee explained that debt collectors had even come to the office before the manager intervened. Meanwhile, Yi Yang felt a cold cynicism rising within him. With a gaze like a hawk, he locked onto Wang Wei, hoping this wasn't a classic case of a viper biting its savior, before ordering a search of her home. Wang Wei's face turned deathly pale as she protested, asking why she was being treated like a criminal just for agreeing to see her friend's body. She lashed out, accusing the police of targeting her simply because they failed to catch the real killer 10 years ago and were desperate for a scapegoat. You seem remarkably well informed about those old cases, Yang remarked, his eyes narrowing as Su Wanrong also sensed something was deeply wrong. Wang Wei frantically argued that her knowledge was common sense, but Yi Yang stepped forward, pointing out the fresh calluses on her hands. He noted those marks came from recent manual labor, an oddity for a mere office assistant, and he didn't give her a single moment to invent an excuse. He explained that the calluses were only the first clue. The second was her sudden change in demeanor when he described the specific details of the murder. He had seen that flash of dark joy in her eyes when the suspicion shifted elsewhere, and to be honest, he knew the mind of a criminal far too well. Deep down, his past experiences had taught him that the killer is often the most unlikely person, the one who tries hardest to appear close to the victim. Wang Wei had been crying so bitterly lately that even Su Wanrong was moved, but Yang didn't trust tears. Emotions, after all, are the greatest distractions. Wang Wei's lips trembled as she claimed he was mistaken, but Yang simply curled his lip and told a colleague to call Li Hong. He wanted to know if Wang Wei had recently tried to borrow money from Fei Fei. When the call connected, Li Hong's voice sounded utterly exhausted. She confirmed that Wang Wei had asked half a month ago and several times since, but Fei Fei refused and even threatened to fire her if she didn't stop. Yi Yang thanked her calmly, even as Li Hong asked if they really suspected Wang Wei instead of the killer from 10 years ago. We see him explain that they never confirmed it was the same killer, only that the cases were similar, before he turned his cold gaze back to Wang Wei. He asked if it was fair to assume that after being repeatedly rejected and facing termination, she had acted out of a deep-seated, murderous resentment. Wang Wei's eyes widened and her lips quivered for several seconds before she managed to squeeze out that while she had been angry, she eventually understood. She even let out a soft, mocking laugh, asking for proof and claiming mere speculation couldn't convict her, but Yi Yang told her not to hurry. He noted that evidence would appear soon, as she hadn't had enough time in just a few hours to destroy every trace of her crime. Since Fei Fei died after 3:30 in the morning, and it was only 9 now, she would have needed far more time to cover her tracks properly. He decided they wouldn't be going to the hospital after all, but straight to her home, where his people were likely already finding clues. Wang Wei's jaw tightened, a small movement that only made him more certain, and he immediately gave the order to take her away. Her apartment was only a 10-minute drive from the office, and she remained eerily quiet until they saw 2 patrol cars waiting downstairs. A middle-aged officer hurried over to greet them, expressing concern that Professor Su and Yi Yang were being forced to work so tirelessly. Su Wanrong shook her head, stating it was her duty, especially since the Bureau had ordered the case solved within a week due to its history. She paused before mentioning that Mayor Zeng had emphasized during a meeting that every department would be held accountable if another murder occurred. Su Wanrong gave a cold smile, declaring it wouldn't take a week. They would solve it today, a statement that left the others in complete shock. To be more precise, Yi Yang looked directly at Wang Wei and told her they would have their answer within the hour. Wang Wei remained silent as a patrol officer came downstairs to report that no suspicious items had been found in her home. There was no murder weapon, not even a basic knife, and Wang Wei finally let out a small smile, asking if they believed her now. Yi Yang suggested they go inside anyway, his tone light as he mentioned being thirsty after talking for so long. Su Wanrong smiled faintly, knowing the Yi family never lost heart before a suspect, as Wang Wei led them up to the 4th floor. Inside, officers were already searching the messy apartment. We see Yi Yang head for the water dispenser to pour a cup for Su Wanrong. He wandered through the rooms with his own water until he reached the bathroom, where he stopped to stare intently at the floor. When Su Wanrong asked what he was looking at, he pointed down, asking if she didn't think the floor was unusually wet for a morning. Wang Wei's eyes flickered as she asked what was wrong with having water in a bathroom, but Yi Yang simply noted it was a curious detail. He remarked that her courage to take a shower while being so sick was commendable, before turning to open the only bedroom door. The apartment was small, suggesting she wasn't extravagant, perhaps because all her money had been lost to her gambling habit. But as he opened the door, his eyes lit up. There stood a life-size cloth doll, looking worn as if it were frequently handled. He immediately called for a rope, causing Wang Wei's body to sway slightly, while Su Wanrong watched in silent realization. Though confused, the officer handed him a rope, and Yi Yang began wrapping it around the doll, following faint, existing indentations. Wang Wei's face turned as pale as paper as he pulled the doll's hands behind its back, prompting a gasp of shock from the room. He didn't stop, his hands moving with precision as the doll began to mirror the exact, complex binding posture found on Fei Fei. Before he could even finish, Wang Wei suddenly erupted into a hysterical scream, begging him to stop the binding immediately. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, as Yi Yang knelt down to ask if she had anything left to say for herself. She looked up with a ghostly face, wanting to know how he had suspected her from the start and recognized the marks on the doll. Su Wanrong wore a knowing smile as the case finally broke, while Yi Yang calmly explained that the answer was quite simple. He noted that while Fei Fei helped many people at the office, everyone else reacted with shock to the news of her death, everyone except her. Wang Wei's voice was weak as she argued that her immediate tears were normal, but Yi Yang noted she hadn't shown a shred of genuine surprise. Seeing the calluses on her hands only confirmed his suspicions, and by the time he heard of her gambling debts, he was certain she was the killer. He sighed, thinking this was a classic case of the farmer and the viper. Even in his past life as a criminal, he had never stooped to such betrayal. A twisted smile suddenly broke across Wang Wei's fragile face as she scoffed, claiming she had already repaid Fei Fei for a previous loan. She grew hysterical, asking why Fei Fei couldn't help one last time instead of watching her get beaten to death by debt collectors. She claimed she had given Fei Fei all her creative design ideas as a reward for her help, only to be met with a notice of dismissal in return. In her mind, such a person deserved to die, a sentiment that left Yi Yang feeling a strange mix of surprise and grim irony. Suddenly, a pleasant female voice came through a phone, asking for Ms. Wang Wei of Shanghai Design Company on behalf of the Brilliance Cup. The caller announced that her work had qualified for the competition and she was invited to compete for the finals. Wang Wei froze in shock. We see Su Wanrong and Yi Yang exchange a look of disbelief as the caller continued to ask if Ms. Wang was still on the line. Wang Wei began to tremble violently, tears streaming down her face as she let out a guttural scream, asking why Fei Fei hadn't told her sooner. Yi Yang stood up, his voice cold as he told her that while she deserved her fate, she could seek atonement if she ever left prison. Su Wanrong signaled for the officers to handcuff her, and as Wang Wei rose, she whispered, asking if he had truly known everything from the start. He asked if the doll was simply something she hadn't had time to discard, and if her illness was a self-inflicted cover from a night of cold air. She stood with her mouth slightly opened before finally nodding, admitting that her plan began the moment Fei Fei first refused to help her. Her voice turned eerily calm as she explained how she had spent half a month studying old case files from 10 years ago to learn the technique. After one last argument 2 days prior, she decided to act. Last night, after the murder, she followed the plan to make herself look sick. She admitted he was right about the doll. She had used it to practice the complex bindings for weeks before the actual crime. Because it was so large, she hadn't dared to throw it away, never imagining anyone would actually suspect her of such a thing. Yi Yang had heard enough and asked the officers to take her away before telling his mother it was time to announce that the case was solved. Otherwise, the public might truly start to doubt the family's competence. Su Wanrong nodded with relief as Wang Wei was finally led away. At the doorway, however, she stopped and looked back, telling Yi Yang and the others that if she survived prison, she would seek atonement. She asked them to apologize to Huang Fei at her grave if they had the chance. She seemed to have more to say, but ultimately swallowed her words. Once she was taken away, the remaining people in the room broke into applause, and Su Wanrong gave her son a proud, beaming thumbs up. She told him how proud she was. Later, we learned that while this was happening, the office of his father, Yi Zhongbang, was filled with tension. The case files were spread out before him as he scanned the worried faces of his team, calmly asking them to share their thoughts on the matter. He noted that the Kyoto Municipal Bureau had already promised the public an explanation within a week, a tight deadline, to be sure. And yet, a faint smile played on his lips as someone grumbled that Zhao Qingyang was certainly in quite a hurry to see results. His father didn't seem to mind, noting it was their jurisdiction, but reminded everyone that the priority remained solving the case immediately. When asked for an analysis, a man in glasses remarked that the case was both complex and simple at the same time. The complexity, as he saw it, lay in the shadow of the past. He reminded Minister Yi that he had been the bureau chief when the similar case occurred 10 years ago, making this timing quite suspicious. His father waved him off, insisting they only discuss the facts, as no one knew the original case better than this veteran team. He warned that the morning's murder would cause a sensation by tomorrow, and failing to solve it would bring shame to the entire system. His expression grew heavy as he realized that despite all the talk, no one had offered a single meaningful lead or opinion. Watching them look at one another in silence, his heart sank, wondering if years of comfort had finally dulled their old investigative fire. Just as his frustration peaked, a knock sounded at the door, and an assistant let in an officer who rushed in with a look of pure joy. Someone scolded the man for his lack of composure during a meeting, but the breathless officer could hardly contain his excitement. He blurted out the news that the morning's brutal murder case had already been solved, plunging the office into a sudden, stunned silence. After a few seconds, everyone stood up in shock, asking if he was serious and if that monster from 10 years ago had finally been caught. We see a flash of joy cross his father's face, but it quickly fades when he notices the officer's hesitant expression as he asks if there was a complication. The officer explains that the killer isn't the one from 10 years ago, which seems impossible, given the binding method and the bloody message left behind. Everything pointed to the past. After all, that specific signature was so unique they hadn't seen it in decades, making a mistake feel out of the question. His father is left utterly perplexed, but just then, a proud voice drifts in from outside the door, noting that they had all been deceived by the technique. It seems he was the only one who saw the truth. The voice addresses Yi Zhongbang directly, telling him that the Yi family has raised quite a son. Only his mother, Su Wanrong, would dare call his father by his full name, leaving the man to wonder if the case truly involved Yi Yang. His father feels as though he's wandering through a fog, but his mother nods firmly, explaining that the killer's binding method was only superficially similar. While the team had spent hours studying the victim, Yi Yang had spotted the discrepancy in just 3 seconds, a humbling thought, to be sure. Even more impressive, he had successfully caught the killer in just over an hour, a revelation that leaves everyone in the room absolutely stunned. They had pored over details for hours while someone else saw through it in seconds. They used high-tech equipment while he brought the truth to light instantly. After the initial shock wears off, his father's laughter echoes through the office, and though the others feel a bit embarrassed, they are genuinely happy for him. They remark that he is a true credit to the great Yi family, especially considering young Master Yi is only 17 years old. One man takes a deep breath and gives a thumbs up, admitting his admiration before asking who the real culprit was, if not the ghost from the past. The answer is Wang Wei, the assistant of the victim Huang Fei, a girl who, to be honest, looked like the most ordinary person imaginable. The crowd is shocked once more, realizing they hadn't spent a single moment all morning suspecting one of Huang Fei's own colleagues. It was a classic case of the bystanders seeing what the experts missed. His father immediately orders that Zhao Qingyang be notified to call a press conference. He wants Yang to attend the briefing in person, standing tall and proud, but his mother simply chuckles and shakes her head. She tells Yi Zhengbang that their son has other plans, reminding him that a week is a long time and the Yi family hasn't forgotten their old grudge. He intends to reclaim the dignity the family lost years ago. His father gasps in disbelief, realizing that Yi Yang intends to hunt down the original killer. Meanwhile, we see the young man return home and head straight to the study, barely acknowledging the housekeeper, Mother Wang, as she calls him for dinner. He answered with a quick word, asking not to be disturbed as he finally located the case files from 10 years ago, a thick, daunting stack that he began to read with immense patience. September 16, 2007, at 6 a.m., the body of Li Yuling, 23 years old, was discovered in Fengyang Park within the Chaoguang district. She had suffered a fatal blow to the head. Then, on September 18, 2007, another victim was found in the Eryang district. Huang Xiaoya had been left in a green belt on Qingguang Road, having died of suffocation. Then, on September 29, 2007, under the Zhaoguang Bridge, Zhang Yuhuan was found, having been assaulted and thrown into the river. He finished the files in one sitting and began writing down every clue he could find. 10 years had passed, and criminal investigation methods were now worlds apart from the past. If these crimes happened today, they might have been solved long ago. He remained immersed in his notes until his mother entered with lunch, prompting him to ask why she had returned. Mother Wang had called, worried he hadn't eaten. She explained she didn't want to disturb him, but her eyes suddenly widened as they fell upon his writing. She asked where he had found such detailed psychological profiles. He offered a small smile, explaining it was quite simple. One only had to compare the bloody characters left on the backs of each victim to see the pattern. We see him point out that from the very start, the killer decided to take 9 lives, writing 9 to 1 on the back of the first victim. However, the handwriting in the photos showed tremors, meaning she was terrified during that first kill, but by the second victim, the bloody script had become significantly steadier. As the body count rose, the killer's handwriting eventually devolved into a frantic, arrogant scrawl. By the time she reached the 9th victim and remained uncaught, she felt like a queen, a ruler who could look down upon all laws with utter contempt. From initial fear to gradual habit, and finally to a boastful disdain for the justice system. This was the evolution of her psyche across those 9 murders. Because she stopped exactly at 9, he realized a long-standing conclusion could now be overturned, though his mother hadn't quite grasped his meaning yet. She asked what conclusion he was referring to, and he stated firmly that the killer never chose her targets at random. As he wrote his final word, his mother reflexively argued that it was impossible, as those 9 people didn't even know each other and had no connection. She reminded him of who had made that original assessment, and he acknowledged it was his father, but he questioned if his father was necessarily right. Seeing her lingering doubt, he continued, explaining that if the killer were merely a mindless maniac, she would have simply written a 9 or an 8. There would have been no need to overcomplicate things by leaving a specific ratio like 9 to something, which suggested a much deeper, calculated intent. He concluded that from the very beginning, the killer hadn't just chosen the number of victims, but had handpicked specific targets who were undoubtedly connected to her. His explanation was so thorough that his mother found it hard to disagree, even though in her heart, his father remained the ultimate genius of criminal investigation. Yet his logic was sound. Every piece of analysis pointed toward a hidden link between those 9 victims. She sighed and asked what his next move would be. He planned to track down the families of the deceased and investigate one more time, digging until he reached the very root of the matter, despite 10 years having passed. They might not all still be in Kyoto, but finding even 3 of the families would likely be enough. He prepared to leave as soon as he finished speaking. He only managed 2 steps before his mother grabbed him with a fierce look, insisting that even if the sky were falling, her son would eat his lunch first. Later, at the police station, we see them checking the household registration archives. A decade of changes meant 3 families had permanently left Kyoto. The remaining 6 had mostly moved to new residences. As Kyoto developed rapidly over the years, they had transitioned from comfortable families to wealthy ones. Our first stop was the home of the very first victim, Li Yuling, located in a residential community on the outskirts of the city. He rang the bell, and the door was opened by a woman nearing 60 who looked at them with deep confusion, wondering who they were and what they wanted. His mother gave a warm smile, asking if the woman remembered her, Su Wanro. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses, and her eyes immediately began to redden. Recognizing her as the forensic doctor, Su, she hurried them inside. The house was well furnished, suggesting a life of relative comfort despite the past tragedy. As they sat and she brought tea, her expression flickered with hesitation. He decided to be direct, stating they were there regarding her daughter's case from 10 years ago. The woman swayed slightly, her voice trembling as she asked if there were finally new leads after a decade of silence. To be honest, she had likely given up hope. He explained there were new theories and asked a few questions. She nodded nervously as he asked if her daughter, Li Yuling, had known the second victim, Huangya. She didn't. He then asked if she or her husband had known the parents of the other victims, like Huangya or Zhang Yuhuan, but the answer was the same. The families had met briefly after the crimes, but they remained strangers. This was expected, and while his mother offered comfort, he tried a different angle. He asked if she still kept any of her daughter's belongings that he might examine. She shook her head, explaining that aside from a few photos, everything was gone. The items had either been buried with her or burned as offerings. She couldn't bear to keep them, as the sight caused too much pain. A perfectly natural reaction, really. Some choose to hold on to the past, while others cannot bear to touch the memories. Since no valuable clues were found here, they prepared to take their leave. Li Yuling's mother gripped Su Wanrong's hands tightly, asking if, in all honesty, a case that had gone cold for 10 years could truly be solved. His mother didn't know how to answer, but Yiyang spoke up, telling the old woman to rest easy and wait for news within a single week. He promised the real killer would be found. The woman's weary expression suddenly brightened at the thought that 10 years of waiting might finally end. As they left the Li home, his mother chided him for being so certain when they hadn't found a single clue all day. He disagreed, noting they had at least ruled out a vendetta against the parents. Now, they needed to find the link between the girls themselves. We see them heading downstairs, but before they can reach the car, Li Yuling's mother comes rushing after them, calling for the forensic doctor. She caught her breath and pulled a shopping card from her pocket, explaining it was something her daughter had left behind. Because it had a significant balance on it, she hadn't burned it with the other belongings, and she had only just remembered it might be useful. Yiyang took the card, his eyes lighting up as a smile spread across his face. To be honest, this was exactly the breakthrough he needed. After the woman returned upstairs, his mother watched him treasure the card like a prize, completely puzzled as to what secret it could possibly hold. He simply told her to review the identities and occupations of every victim, leaving the mystery for her to solve on her own. They had been driving for about 10 minutes when a flash of realization hit her, and she snatched the card to read the gold-embossed letters. It read Golden Department Store, a landmark built 15 years ago that had eventually been phased out of Kyoto by the rise of e-commerce. Yet, this defunct mall was the key. We learned that the third victim, Zhang Yuhuan, had once worked there as a sales clerk. Before his mother could say a word, Yiyang told the driver, Old Wu, to head straight for the site of the old Golden Department Store. His mother laughed in exasperation, realizing he had figured it out the moment he saw the card and had just been playing mysterious. She joked about him wasting her precious time, but he simply smiled, knowing that the mental exercise was worth far more than 10 minutes. No one expected a connection between Li Yuling and Zhang Yuhuan through a mall that, 10 years ago, was at the height of its glory. Now, they only needed to discover if anything happened there before the first murder that could link the victims to a potential killer. If they could find that link, the search for the culprit would narrow significantly. His mother listened, unable to resist pinching his cheek in pride. She shook her head in disbelief, wondering if this brilliant young man was truly her son, and joked that if it weren't for the family legacy, he might have kept his talents hidden forever. Yiyang simply smiled without confirming or denying it. While he could ignore many things, he would never allow his mother to lose face in public. His mother was overjoyed, pulling him into a firm embrace and expressing how happy she felt now that her son was finally capable of protecting her. The car fell silent for a moment, and soon we arrive at the former site of the Golden Department Store, which has since been renamed the Dawan Plaza. It is now a modern hub for shopping and entertainment. As they step out, his mother mentions that the mall's owner has changed, but fortunately, they have a lead. Li Mingbo greets them with a wide smile, welcoming Professor Su and Yiyang. Once seated, he admits he is curious why two such prominent figures have come to see him personally. He claims to be flattered and urges them to speak freely, promising to tell them everything he knows, so his mother gets straight to the point. She asks if anything significant happened at the Golden Department Store 10 years ago, specifically, in the days leading up to September 16, 2007. Li Mingbo freezes for a second before giving a dry laugh, remarking that the Golden Department Store feels like a lifetime ago and that the date is quite specific. He claims the time frame is too broad for him to remember anything clearly. To be honest, after 10 years, such a lapse in memory is perfectly understandable. However, Yeong watches his eyes closely and lets out a cold laugh, questioning if the manager truly believes nothing of importance happened back in 2007. His smile grows even colder as he shifts the tone, stating that they are now officially requesting his cooperation in a criminal investigation. He demands that every incident of any significance from the 2007 Golden Department store be compiled and delivered to Minister Ye's office by 9 a.m. tomorrow. He warns him to be meticulous and not to leave out a single detail, no matter how small. Lee Mingbo stares at him, his eyes wide with shock. The manager stammers, asking what he means by recording every single detail, but his shifting gaze tells Yeong that he has already remembered something. Seeing that the man is hesitant to speak, Yeong stands up and says that if that's the case, they will expect the full report on Minister Ye's desk by morning. After a quick signal to his mother, he turns to leave. Seeing them walk away, Lee Mingbo begins to panic, realizing the gravity of the situation. He calls out to forensic Dr. Su and Yeong, pleading with them not to rush, as he simply needs a little more time to recall events from so long ago. Deep down, he knows he cannot afford to offend the Yi family. If they were to get angry, they could easily have his mall inspected from dawn until dusk until it was forced to close. His mother doesn't quite understand why he suddenly turned so hostile, as Lee Mingbo's words seemed harmless on the surface, but she follows his lead regardless. He tells himself that remembering something from so long ago is no easy task, but regardless of his methods, his mother stands firmly by his side as he stops in his tracks. Turning back to face the manager, he makes it clear that they are investigating the brutal murders from 10 years ago, and if Lee Mingbo withholds information, he will have to face the legal consequences once the truth comes out. As he turns to leave again, Lee Mingbo grits his teeth in a moment of desperation. The manager finally relents, admitting that something major did indeed happen at the Golden Department store just before September 16, 10 years ago, and furthermore, it involved him personally. Yeong spins around instantly, demanding to know what happened on September 10, 2007 at the department store. A horrific elevator accident occurred, and the victim was Lee Mingbo's own son. As he speaks, his eyes turn bloodshot and his expression fills with a haunting grief. Both Yeong and his mother are stunned to realize that September 10th was exactly 6 days before the first brutal murder took place. The Golden Department store really did harbor a dark secret. Yeong presses for details on the elevator accident as Lee Mingbo seems to sink into a painful memory. He explains that it was a weekend and his wife was busy, so he brought the child to the mall, never imagining the boy would wander off while he was occupied. The child ran to play on the elevator just as it malfunctioned, and he was pulled into the machinery. The manager's voice begins to tremble uncontrollably. He asks Yeong if he can even imagine it. His son's head was crushed, leaving a horrific scene within the elevator's inner workings. By the end of his story, he looks like a cornered, desperate beast with eyes full of fire. His mother softly offers her apologies, but Lee Mingbo keeps his head bowed. He seems not to hear her, and after watching him for a long moment, Yeong sighs, expressing his own regrets for bringing up such a tragedy. The manager lifts his reddened eyes and forces a bitter smile, asking if there is anything else the young master or Professor Su wished to know. That smile is laced with a hidden resentment, as if asking if they enjoyed tearing open his old wounds. Without another word, we see them leave his office. Back in the car, his mother notices his deep silence and asks what is on his mind. He is wondering how those 6 days connect everyone involved. He tries to find the link between Lee Mingbo's son, Li Yuling, Huangya, and Zhang Yuhuan. His mother's eyes widen in surprise at the implication. She asks if he truly suspects Lee Mingbo of being the killer, but he clarifies that anyone connected to the events of 10 years ago is now a suspect. Lee Mingbo is under suspicion, as is everyone who worked at the Golden Department store back then. He speaks in a low, contemplative tone. He questions whether the man could have devised such a meticulous killing plan in just 6 days, as he prefers to consider every possibility from the start. He plans to use the process of elimination to narrow down the suspects until only the killer remains, as there were many theories hidden in the shadows back then. Yet, no one ever looked toward the Golden Department store. This might be a new direction, or perhaps the only correct one. He asks his mother to check which high-level executives from the store are still in Kyoto, specifically wanting to know the details of the elevator incident. He needs to know if Li Yuling and Huangya were present when it happened. If there is video footage, it would be perfect, though that requires a specific trip. We see him recall that the Security Bureau might still have those records, assuming they haven't been lost to time. So, why wait? They should go now. As he tells the driver to head out, his mother looks a bit hesitant. After all, the Security Bureau is Zhao Qingyang's territory, and she fears tipping him off. Where there are people, there are politics, and where there are politics, there is conflict. Zhao Qingyang himself is no match for the Yi family, but he is backing. Behind him stands a family equal in power to the Yes, and tripping each other up is a common pastime. Yeong understands his mother's concern perfectly. However, he simply offers a confident smile, reminding her that they are officially investigating a 10-year-old serial murder case. Zhao Qingyang has no idea they've already caught the real killer of Huang Fei, so visiting now shouldn't pose a problem. His mother pauses, then smiles sheepishly. The car soon arrives at the security bureau, where many officers recognize his mother and stand to greet her. Naturally, the news reaches Zhao Qingyang quickly. He arrives late, of course, wearing a wide and practiced smile as he greets Professor Su and Yi Yang with feigned warmth. He asks what wind blew them in, wondering if they have new leads on this morning's murder. He is clearly desperate for information on the recent case. His mother offers a thin, polite smile, explaining that they are only there to retrieve detailed files on the serial killings from a decade ago. She asks Director Zhao if the Bureau still has them. He assures her that every case handled by the Bureau is meticulously archived. However, he notes that finding a 10-year-old file won't be easy, suggesting they go ask in the archives room if they are truly determined to look. With a grand, sweeping gesture, he promises that the entire Kyoto Security Bureau will assist them, a very impressive display of cooperation on the surface. But we live in the digital age, and while the physical archives exist, most records have long since been moved to computers for permanent storage. If they actually tried to find paper files, it would take forever. His mother's expression sours as she asks why they can't just check the computer. With a look of mock apology, he claims the Bureau's computer systems are undergoing a total upgrade today and are currently unavailable. He suggests that if they are willing to wait, they should stay and see. His mother wants to argue, but Yi Yang simply smiles and says there's no need. They will go to the archives themselves. Zhao Qingyang notes that while Professor Su has clearance, Yi Yang certainly does not. Yi Yang smiles calmly, admitting he isn't part of the security system and lacks clearance for confidential files, but that won't stop him. He remarks that Director Zhao's information is a bit slow. He wasn't part of the system before, but exactly 1 second ago, that changed. He has been appointed as a special investigator for this case. If Zhao doubts it, he can call Minister Yi to verify. He emphasizes it wasn't minutes or hours ago, but just 1 second. Zhao Qingyang's expression sours instantly at the news. Zhao mutters that he will verify it later, then orders his men to lead Professor Su and Yi Yang to the archives to search at their leisure. His mother knows this place well, as it was once his father's office, so she leads the way to the archives without assistance. Inside, they find 2 older officers. After a quick greeting, Yi Yang asks which shelf holds the 2007 serial murder files. The 2 men exchange looks and admit that with so many files every year, they can't remember that specific case clearly. They point them toward shelf C12, though they warn there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cases there to sift through. Yi Yang doesn't argue. He heads straight for shelf C12 and begins searching by month, knowing the difficulty lies in the details. We see him and his mother perched on ladders, searching through the dust until, finally, his mother lets out a soft cry of success. Looking at the massive stack of documents, she rolls her eyes. The case dragged on so long that the paperwork is overwhelming. Yi Yang reminds her they only need the interview records, as they already have their own notes. Looking at the rest would be a waste of time. While he continues to scan the shelves without pulling files yet, his mother quietly flips through the records of the witnesses interviewed. She focuses specifically on the statements from those who assisted the investigation, not letting a single detail slip past her as time ticks away. After a long while, a strange look crosses Yi Yang's face as he asks if there was a man named Xiao Dajiang who gave a statement. His mother quickly checks the files and confirms the name is there, wondering how he could possibly have known that. He holds up a document with absolute certainty, stating that solving this decade-old case depends entirely on finding this man, Xiao Dajiang. Neither he nor his mother are familiar with the name at first, but as it appears in the files, her memory begins to drift back 10 years. That case had shocked the entire city, and as the head of forensics, his mother's concern for the investigation was second to none. She vaguely recalls being present when Xiao Dajiang gave his statement. As the memory clears, she finally sets the files down. If she remembers correctly, this Xiao Dajiang was the security captain at the Golden City Mall. Yi Yang confirms this as he hands her the file. Her eyes brighten as she realizes this is the file for the elevator accident. The day Li Mingbo's son met his tragic end. He nods, noting it covers the day of the death, and asks her to guess what else he found. Several statements, including one from Zhang Yuan. His mother takes the document and softly reads the record aloud, describing how manager Li's child was playing on the elevator that day. The witness had shouted at the boy several times, but he ignored her. When the store manager called, she turned to return to her post. In that split second, the elevator malfunctioned, the child was pulled in, and the result was, to be perfectly honest, utterly horrific. When asked why she didn't hit the emergency stop, Zhang Yuan claimed she was simply too terrified to think, as was everyone else nearby. These old records tell us exactly what happened. The child refused to listen, and the bystanders were too intimidated by his father's status to intervene. No one expected the machinery to fail at that moment, first catching the child's foot before pulling him further into the mechanism. Yi Yang analyzes the scene, realizing that an emergency stop would have only resulted in a lost limb rather than a lost life. A dark possibility crosses his mind, but he keeps it to himself for now, choosing instead to ask why there is no video footage. His mother looks uneasy, explaining that the serial killings almost always occurred in areas without surveillance, a common issue back then. Things were different 10 years ago, and the only images left of the victims are usually just fragmented clips from their daily lives. He presses further, wondering why a major shopping mall would have absolutely no footage of such a high-profile elevator accident. His mother is stunned. The files show the officers viewed the footage at the time, yet for some reason, it was never actually archived. He returns the files to the shelf and takes her arm, convinced that Xiao Dajiang is the missing link between these two cases. Finding him is the only way to lock onto the killer from a decade ago. Without another word, they turn and leave the archives. Inside, the two officers head off to report to Zhao Qingyang. As for what they say, we aren't concerned with wasting time on their office politics. Leaving the station, we head to the civil registry department. After all, finding one specific man in a city as vast as Kyoto is no simple task. The supervisor is quite cooperative. No one dares snub the Yi family, but the name Xiao Dajiang is unfortunately common, making the search difficult. To ensure they get the news immediately, they even ignore a call from Nanny Wang inviting them for dinner, staying focused on the task. It isn't until 8 in the evening that a staff member finally runs over with the files, calling out to Professor Su and Yi Yang that they found him. The two of them stand up at once, asking where he lives, but the staff member's expression turns hesitant, causing Yi Yang to frown in suspicion. It wasn't that the information was a secret, but rather that the Xiao Dajiang who served as security captain at Golden City Mall. He paused, lowering his voice. He had already died 10 years ago. Hearing this, both Yi Yang and his mother are visibly shaken by the sudden revelation. A man so vital to the decade-old serial killing case had been dead this entire time, a twist that, to be honest, he hadn't anticipated at all. Whether it was the serial killings or the elevator tragedy involving Li Mingbo's son, Xiao Dajiang had always felt like the central link between them. He had given statements for both cases, so without wasting a second, Yi Yang asked the staff to pull up the man's full records. The files confirm this is indeed the man they were looking for, but they also show he died in a car accident on October 4, 2007. The driver who hit him was caught months later, only to pass away from cancer shortly after entering prison. A very convenient ending, one might say. After reviewing the materials, Yi Yang narrows his eyes, sensing a murder for hire. His mother, a veteran forensic doctor, senses the same strange patterns. The clerk Zhang Yuhuan died on September 29th and Xiao Dajiang died on October 4th, a gap of only 5 days between their deaths. The fact that the driver who killed Xiao Dajiang just happened to be a terminal cancer patient makes it nearly impossible not to be suspicious. His mother notes in a low voice that it seems the serial killing case from 10 years ago didn't just have 9 victims after all. There were 10. Yi Yang releases the mouse and suggests they set the case aside for now to head home for dinner as the sun sets. His mother checks her watch and realizes it's past 8. She insists he shouldn't skip meals while he's young, taking the matter of dinner quite seriously. She pulls him along as they leave, and they return to the brightly lit Yi residence, where his father, Yi Jingbang, is sitting on the sofa. By the television sit 2 elders, our protagonist's grandparents, Yi Guoyang and Shui Yuzhu. His grandfather's face is stern, carrying a natural authority. His grandmother is elegant and poised, with eyes that seem to see through the world's complexities, a common observation about the Yi family in Kyoto. Except for the young master, every member of this family, man or woman, is a tiger in the military or police world, even the kindly-looking grandmother. Shui Yuzhu is a renowned administrative expert. Though retired, no one forgets how she personally went to the northeast to capture a notorious gang leader. As Yi Yang walks through the door, his grandfather offers a rare smile, prompting the young man to ask why they've returned so suddenly. His grandmother, who dotes on him most, stands up with joy to clasp his hand before glancing at the darkening sky outside. Her gaze sharpens as she asks Yi Yang's father if he has eaten. The father, looking like a scolded child, reminds her they just ate together. She snaps back, asking how he has the nerve to eat while his son is out working on his behalf. Hardly the behavior of a proper father. His father's face wilts like a bitter melon. He wants to point out she enjoyed the meal too, but wisely, he chooses to just apologize repeatedly. With a huff, she calls to Nanny Wang to cook fresh dishes, insisting that her precious grandson and wonderful daughter-in-law must not go hungry. Yi Yang and his mother feel a bit sheepish, but after dinner, the grandfather removes his glasses and asks if Yi Yang spent the day investigating. He confirms he learned quite a lot, which immediately piques his father's interest regarding any new leads on the decade-old serial killing case. Before he can finish, the grandmother smacks the back of his head, reminding him he only holds his current position because of his family's support. The father protests that she shouldn't discard her own son just because she has a grandson, jokingly reminding her whose flesh and blood he is. She simply retorts that she's been looking at him for 40 years and is bored of him, all while affectionately peeling an orange for Yi Yang. Eating the orange, Yi Yang notes that the case remained unsolved largely due to the negligence of the original investigators, a bold claim, indeed. His mother agrees, concluding that the primary reason for the failure was Yi Jingbang himself, causing the father to frown in disagreement. He insists he was cautious at every step, but Yi Yang points out he failed to check the Golden City Mall or the victim's connections. He explains that Li Yuling had a mall membership card, and Zhang Yuhuan was a clerk there, connections that were overlooked at the time. Shortly after Zhang Yuhuan's death, the security captain Xiao Dajiang died in an accident, following the tragedy of Li Mingbo's son in the elevator. By ignoring the Golden City Mall, the most critical link in those accidental deaths, the true killer was allowed to remain free for 10 long years. Our family has carried that disgrace for a decade. His father's expression shifts completely, staring silently at Yi Yang and the grandfather. His grandmother reacts similarly, though she immediately begins mapping out the details on paper until she writes down a single name. Li Mingbo. Unsurprisingly, he is the prime suspect. She sets down her pen as Yi Yang offers an impressed thumbs up. He notes that her mind is as sharp as ever, reaching the same conclusion he did, yet her face remains uncharacteristically solemn. She points out that even if they suspect Li Mingbo, any physical evidence would have surely been destroyed after 10 years. With a slight smirk, Yi Yang suggests that Xiao Dajiang or Zhang Yuhuan might still tell them where the evidence is hidden. When reminded they are dead, he simply notes that even the deceased can be made to speak. Soon, the lights of the Yi household fade. In one room, however, the parents are still awake. The father, Yi Zhengbang, frowns and asks Wan Rong if she's noticed something odd about their son. His mother is instantly defensive, reminding him that Yi Yang only stepped into the spotlight because of the weight of this decade-old case. With public opinion linking Huang Fei's death to the past, the Yi family faces a heavy burden if they cannot provide a clear answer. The father understands the stakes, yet wonders why it matters since Huang Fei's case is technically solved. His wife merely scoffs at him. She tells him his high-ranking position has dulled his wits, for very few people would believe that a woman like Wang Wei was the true killer. The original case left an indelible shadow on Kyoto. Now, news of Huang Fei's death has the entire city buzzing with fear. On every street corner, people whisper that the demon from 10 years ago has returned, and the online backlash has become unstoppable. Some have even leaked the identities of the parents who originally handled the case, bringing a wave of public criticism crashing down on them. The father realizes that Wang Wei has essentially left them a ticking time bomb. His wife softens her tone, but her surprise remains. She admits that the old Yi Yang was weak and perhaps a bit stubborn, lacking the spirit of a military descendant until today. After spending the day with him, she feels she completely misjudged him. He is, as she proudly notes, truly her child. The father beams with pride as well, but they have no idea that in the dead of night, someone is making a move. The bedroom door opens quietly as a figure slips out of the Yi household. It is late at night, and he walks for a long time before finally flagging down a taxi. The driver looks weary, asking why a young man is out so late and if his parents won't worry. Yi Yang simply shakes his head with a smile, noting that late is actually better. When he asks to go to the Huanshan cemetery on the outskirts of town, the driver's eyes widen in nervous disbelief, asking him to repeat the destination. Yi Yang nods in confirmation. It's past midnight, and a 17-year-old boy isn't heading home or to a party, but to a graveyard. The driver wipes his face, making sure his passenger is actually a living person before taking a deep breath. After all, a trip to the outskirts pays quite well. Summoning his courage, the driver arrives at the cemetery at 1 in the morning. As Yi Yang steps out, the man offers a final, well-meaning question. He asks what business a boy could possibly have here in the dead of night. Yi Yang jokingly asks if he'd like to come along and help catch a thief. The driver shakes his head frantically and speeds away, leaving Yi Yang to smile and walk alone into the eerie, midnight silence of the cemetery. The atmosphere is chilling, but he doesn't mind. In his past life, he spent many nights in graveyards, sitting before tombstones to feel the cold air around him. We see his pace quicken slightly until he stops before a specific grave. The photo on the stone shows a rugged, ordinary-looking man in his 30s. He looks at the name and speaks softly, wondering aloud if Xiao Dajiang's former superior, Li Mingbo, will actually show up tonight. After speaking, he steps into the shadows to wait. As a former criminal himself, he understands the psychology of certain offenders all too well. He knows that those who commit major crimes and remain free for years often harbor a sense of arrogant, hidden pride within their hearts. In public, they might act humble or even subservient, but the moment they turn away, their eyes become as cold and calculating as a venomous snake. Sometimes, they even play games with their pursuers just for the thrill. To be honest, Li Mingbo had always seemed like a perfectly unremarkable man. But if he is the true killer, he would realize that Xiao Dajiang's name is resurfacing, and that realization might draw him here to this very spot. He might come to boast of his decade of success to the dead. Though the odds are low, Li Mingbo is a man who lives in profound isolation. Divorced and childless for 10 years, he lives alone every day. Now that the past is being unearthed, the pressure must be mounting. Yi Yang puts himself in the killer's shoes, realizing that even a murderer with blood on his hands eventually feels the need to speak to someone. And for a man like that, secrets can only be shared with the deceased. Time ticks by slowly until, suddenly, something catches his eye in the distance. We catch a glimpse of a faint light flickering below the cemetery grounds. Though it vanishes quickly, it is enough for Yi Yang to notice as the minutes tick by. A figure dressed in a formal suit eventually appears before Xiao Dajiang's tombstone, sitting down to silently light a cigarette before his voice breaks the silence. His tone is filled with a cold, mocking sneer as he tells the dead man that someone has finally started remembering his masterpiece from 10 years ago. He wonders aloud which junior amateur tried to imitate his killings, mocking how they couldn't even tie a rope properly, yet dared to impersonate him. He notes that the police are just as foolish as they were a decade ago, musing whether he should truly come out of retirement for an encore. While he originally killed to avenge his son, he admits that the act became addictive, confessing how much his heart has itched for it these past 10 years. As the words fade, Yi-Yong steps out from the shadows with a calm smile, offering Li Mingbo a chance to scratch that persistent itch in his heart. Li Mingbo's face is instantly masked in horror as he stands up and demands to know how the boy found him. Yi-Yong simply tells him not to be nervous. He reminds the man that such anxiety doesn't suit a high IQ criminal who has successfully evaded the authorities for an entire decade. Li Mingbo's expression darkens with uncertainty, and after a long silence, he asks if Yi-Yong had already suspected him during their meeting earlier that day. Yi-Yong suggests a different perspective, that the moment they found him, Li Mingbo already knew his long-held secrets were becoming impossible to hide. Li Mingbo suddenly bursts into laughter, claiming he knows Yi-Yong must be carrying a recording device, but reminds him that involuntary recordings aren't admissible in court. Yi-Yong shakes his head, explaining that things aren't nearly that complicated. To be honest, he has never cared much for using gadgets like recorders. He claims he simply wanted to see for himself what kind of man the killer really is, though Li Mingbo frowns, clearly finding this difficult to believe. Knowing that even auxiliary evidence has its uses, the killer begins to test him with a cold smile, asking what kind of person Yi-Yong thinks he is. Yi-Yong calls him a man skilled in violent crime, then casually asks where he learned his specific knot-tying technique, noting the timeline of his past. Between his child's death and the murder of Li Yuling, there wasn't enough time to learn such a skill, suggesting he must have mastered it long before. A flash of pride crosses Li Mingbo's face. That specific binding method caused widespread panic 10 years ago, even haunting the nightmares of those who heard of it. Clearly unwilling to reveal his secrets, Li Mingbo coldly tells him to keep guessing before turning his back to walk down the cemetery path. Watching the man's retreating figure, Yi-Yong speaks up softly, causing the killer to look back and ask if he's still trying to squeeze information out of him. Yi-Yong lets out a cold laugh, claiming he is only here tonight to visit a former subordinate. After all, the law doesn't forbid visiting a grave at midnight. He adds that he doesn't understand a single word being said, and without evidence, he remains nothing more than Li Mingbo, the general manager of a major shopping mall. With a final burst of laughter, he continues walking down the path without looking back. We hear Yi-Yong let out a soft sigh as he watches the man's arrogance. He mutters quietly to himself, observing the killer's complete lack of concern. In Li Mingbo's eyes, Yi-Yong is merely a polite young man who isn't even worth a conversation. To him, a 17-year-old boy is just a child. No matter how gifted the boy might be, he is still just a green youth, or so the killer thinks, until he realizes this boy's grip is incredibly strong. Li Mingbo finds himself suddenly pinned and unable to move, demanding to know if a young master from a great family intends to break the law himself. He shouts for Yi-Yong to let go, having spent years studying the law specifically to find loopholes should he ever be caught. Unfortunately for him, his threats ignore one crucial detail. Yi-Yong is a man with absolutely no shackles and no hesitation. Yi-Yong chuckles, wondering aloud who could possibly stop him even if he decided to break the man right here, as his foot settles on Li Mingbo's leg. He notes that while there might be people in the capital who can handle him, Li Mingbo is certainly not one of them. Though he seems to apply no pressure, a sudden, sickening crack echoes through the air, leaving Li Mingbo screaming in absolute agony. Yi-Yong squats before him with a narrow-eyed smile, telling him that even without a confession, the truth is already clear. He reveals that on the day his son died, Li Yuling, Zhang Yuhuan, and Huang Yu were all likely standing right there by that elevator. They watched it happen and did nothing, and in his grief, Li Mingbo decided they were responsible for his son's death and began hunting them down. In the old files of the elevator that ate people, only Zhang Yuhuan's statement was recorded because he worked at the department store. But by some dark coincidence, all 9 of his victims were there that day, either at the elevator doors or riding inside with the child. Li Mingbo seems to forget his pain for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if asking how anyone could possibly know these secrets. Yi-Yong releases his foot and begins walking down the mountain, casually mentioning that he will give the killer one more day to think. Yi-Yong tells him he hopes the man can make things a bit more difficult, otherwise, once time is up, the game will simply end. His voice is a soft whisper, noting that solving crimes might actually be more fun than committing them. Li Mingbo watches him go, staring at the boy's back in disbelief, wondering if outsmarting a high IQ criminal is truly nothing more than a game to Yi-Yong. An hour later, we return to the Yi family estate, which is still deep in slumber, unaware that he had ever left for those 2 hours. He returns to his room and falls into a quiet sleep. By the time he opens his eyes, the sun is high and his mother is calling him for breakfast. After the meal, his grandfather returns to the military academy while his parents rush out for work. Yi-Yong waters the plants, and then he too leaves the house. He has given Li Mingbo 24 hours, and in that time, he intends to secure the key evidence. He plans to send the man from the hospital straight to prison, regardless of his past. 9 lives are too high a price for any grievance. More importantly, he won't let one man tarnish the Yi family's reputation. It takes nearly 30 minutes to reach Xiao Dajiang's old residence. After knocking for a while, the door is opened by a frail, hunched woman in her 60s who asks the young man who he is looking for. Yang identifies himself as being with the security bureau, pulling out an identification card he had prepared earlier just in case. To avoid any unnecessary trouble, he had actually asked his father to secure him a temporary investigator's badge to show the public. Old Madame Xiao squinted at the documents. She lived alone, after all, and couldn't imagine what business the police would have with her. We can see the confusion in her eyes. It was surprising to find that she was the sole occupant of this tiny, 30-square-meter apartment. After stepping inside, he respectfully accepted the tea she offered with both hands. The tea was a bit cloudy, but he didn't mind and took a polite sip. When he asked about the rest of her family, a bitter expression clouded her face. Her son had passed away in an accident 10 years ago. Her husband, unable to bear the grief, followed him just a month later. It had been such a happy family of 3 once. Now, only this old woman remained, living in solitude for a decade. His eyes softened. He hadn't expected General Zhao's family to be living in such a state. General Xiao had been silenced for knowing Li Mingbo's secrets, and his father had died of a broken heart shortly after. It was a tragic chain of events, really. Directly or indirectly, Li Mingbo had 11 lives on his hands. He felt a surge of shock in his heart, though he kept his expression perfectly calm, which, given the circumstances, was no easy feat. He offered his apologies to the old woman, but explained that he was there specifically because of her son, Xiao. After 10 long years, a certain case was finally being reopened. He explained that after all these years, they had found clues suggesting her son might be the most important witness. The old woman sighed, noting that he had been gone for a decade. She wondered if asking her was a waste of time, but Yang gently insisted that she only needed to tell him one thing. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. He asked if her son had ever mentioned keeping something special safe before his accident, and whether the 30-year-old man had anyone particularly close to him at the time. At this question, the old woman's eyes grew red. She revealed that he had been dating a saleswoman from the Golden Edition department store. It was a small, human detail in a cold case. She lamented her son's poor luck, weeping over how his partner had met a tragic, wrongful death, only for him to die in an accident shortly after. To be honest, it was a staggering amount of grief. She cried out to the heavens, asking why this had happened to her family. Her emotions finally collapsed, and Yi Yang realized something he hadn't expected. Xiao Dajiang and Zhang Yuhuan were lovers. He quickly patted her back to comfort her, explaining that he was actually there because of the case involving her son's girlfriend, Zhang Yuhuan. He needed to keep her focused. He asked if her son had shown any unusual reactions after Zhang Yuhuan's tragic death. The old woman frowned, her mind drifting back through the hazy memories of a decade ago. Finally, she remembered something. She recalled a night when he was particularly strange, coming home in the middle of the night and hiding in his room just to cry. He had been heartbroken, yet when she and her husband asked him what was wrong, he refused to say a word. Deep down, Yi Yang felt a jolt of certainty. It seemed Xiao Dajiang really was the key person in this mystery. He asked the old woman to think again. Had her son been particularly protective of any specific object during those days? She remembered a waist bag he wore almost every day, though he had left it at home on the day of his accident. When he was buried, she had placed it in the casket with him. Yi Yang's heart sank at her words. He was now almost certain that the most critical evidence was inside that bag, which, naturally, presented a very difficult problem. Since the bag had been buried as a funerary gift, the only way to retrieve it was to open Xiao Dajiang's grave. It was a grim necessity that he hadn't anticipated. He wondered if this grieving mother would ever allow him to disturb her son's rest to seek justice. Looking at her sorrowful face, he felt a massive headache coming on. But without opening that casket, the evidence would remain lost forever. After a moment of private hesitation, he tentatively asked if she truly believed her son's death was an accident. She looked at him with a hint of doubt, noting that the driver had already confessed in court. Yi Yang then asked if she knew that the driver had been a terminal cancer patient. The man had died in prison shortly after his sentence began. The old woman nodded, saying the driver's family had told her about it later. She seemed surprisingly well informed. She noted that the accident had destroyed the driver's family as well. While she hated them at first, she eventually realized that holding on to that hate served no purpose. Reading between the lines, Yi Yang could see she was someone who tried to find her own peace. Otherwise, she couldn't have found it in her heart to forgive a family that was also broken. Forgiving the person who killed her son was one thing, but Yi Yang had to ask, if he told her that her son was actually murdered, would she believe him? The old woman's eyes widened in shock. She remained speechless for a long time. He gently pulled her down to sit, explaining that while he couldn't be absolutely certain yet, he believed Xiao Dajiang's death was no accident. He suggested it was directly linked to the serial killings that rocked the capital a decade ago, and that the contents of the waste bag buried with him were absolutely vital. With a trembling voice, she asked if he meant they had to take the bag out. Yi Yang nodded solemnly, noting that while Xiao Dajiang had been gone for 10 years, justice had no expiration date. He asked her if she truly wanted to find the real killer so her son could finally rest in peace. The old woman's tears began to flow once more as the weight of the request hit her. She kept repeating that he had been sleeping for so many years, asking if it was truly necessary to wake him. Yi Yang reminded her that she was a reasonable woman who had already forgiven so much. If she could forgive the driver who struck him, why wouldn't she want her son to have the truth? She fell into a heavy silence, looking down without saying a word. He didn't press her further, allowing her the time to make her own decision. As the minutes ticked by, she finally looked up and asked if this was truly the only way. She mentioned they had looked at that bag before and found nothing. Yi Yang suggested that perhaps they hadn't looked closely enough back then, promising that if it was empty, he would make amends. He assured her he would move her son to a place with even better feng shui, but there was one condition: they had to move today. Otherwise, things might become far more complicated. The old woman stopped hesitating and finally nodded, agreeing to follow his lead. Immediately, Yi Yang picked up his phone to make the necessary arrangements. He organized a professional team to go to the Huanshan cemetery to exhume the grave, ensuring a Taoist master was present to perform the proper rites. He gave strict orders that the exhumation and opening of the casket had to be finished by 4 o'clock that afternoon. After hanging up, he turned back to Xiao Dajiang's mother. He told her it was time to head to the cemetery. The poor woman asked one last time if her son would truly not blame them for disturbing his rest. He gently patted her shoulder, suggesting that if he had been murdered, he would only blame them if they let the killer go free. With that, they set off together. Not long after they arrived at the cemetery, the workers and the Taoist master appeared. With a nod from Yi Yang, the somber process of exhuming the body began. To be honest, Yi Yang knew that Xiao Dajiang's death might not be a simple case of victimhood. Since he was Zhang Yuhuan's lover, if he had evidence against Li Mingbo, he should have gone to the police. But he hadn't. Instead, he had kept it hidden, which suggested a far more complex motive than simple fear. Perhaps there were secrets involved that were best left unsaid in front of the old woman, or she never would have agreed to this. After the rites were performed, the workers moved in. After a considerable amount of work, the casket was finally raised to the surface. It was a modest tree burial casket, designed to save space and return to the earth. We see that there was no body left to find. As cremation had long been the standard, only personal items remained, including the waste bag Yi Yang sought. As the casket was raised, he looked at the weeping old woman and asked if they could proceed. She told him to go ahead, hoping her son would be grateful. Wiping away her tears, she gave her consent, and with a nod to the workers, the wooden lid creaked open with a sharp sound. Yi Yang immediately spotted the burial bag, reaching in to pull at the rusted zipper. However, when he finally forced it open, the bag appeared to be completely empty, as if nothing had ever been inside. 10 years underground might change fabric, but it wouldn't make evidence vanish. He didn't panic, instead reaching inside to feel the lining carefully. No one understood what he was doing, least of all the old woman. She knew the bag was empty, but had agreed to this because he insisted it held vital evidence. And perhaps, deep down, she wanted that better burial plot. She asked him with a hint of guilt if that bag could truly serve as evidence. To be honest, she felt she might have misled him. He had known all along that she thought it was empty, but he didn't blame her. Pinching a corner of the lining, he announced that he had found it. He assured her that the truth of her son's death would be revealed tonight. He then instructed the workers to temporarily store Xiao Dajiang's remains. The old woman gripped his hand, overcome with emotion, asking why he was still helping her even though he knew she had kept the bag state a secret. Understanding a parent's heart, he simply smiled and told her that a member of the Yi family always keeps their word. He promised not to go back on his word, then pointed out that the bag wasn't actually empty. Without another word, he headed straight for his mother's office. We find Su Wanrong there, re-examining the autopsy reports of Li Yuling and the other victims, hoping to find a new lead in the old records. She was about to show her annoyance at the interruption until she saw it was him. Her face filled with surprise as she asked why he had come. He told her to call his father immediately to issue an arrest warrant for Li Mingbo. She gasped, asking if he had actually found the evidence. With a mysterious air, he produced the waste bag. He had already torn the stitching, and from a hidden compartment, he pulled out a folded photograph. The creases in the paper were sharp, preserved perfectly for a decade within the lining of the bag. It was a photo Xiao Dajiang had taken using the lights of a park flowerbed, capturing Li Mingbo and Zhang Yuhuan together. His mother was utterly shocked. Back then, everyone assumed the primary crime scene was the Chaoguang Bridge. They never imagined the truth was hidden right before their eyes. The real scene was Chaoguang Park, and no one imagined that while a brutal killer was attacking a woman, another person was hidden in the shadows. Using that nearly impossible lighting, they captured the criminal's face. Looking at the yellowed photo, his mother felt it was truly a miracle of justice. She wondered why Xiao Dajiang hadn't handed it over then, but Yi Yang revealed a detail she didn't know. Dajiang and Zhang Yuhuan were actually dating. His mother's eyes widened in disbelief, wondering why she wouldn't save him if they were a couple. To be honest, that was a very good question. He noted that only Li Mingbo could provide that answer now, suggesting she call his father so they could announce the breakthrough before dark. The 10-year-old serial murder case was finally solved, and as his mother made the call, his father's excitement on the other end was palpable. We can almost hear his father's voice through the phone, shouting in shock and pride that their son had actually cracked the case. She teased him, saying that without their son, it might have taken another decade, and urged him to send a team to the mall to make the arrest. His father laughed, but then realized something was wrong. He had people watching the mall all day, and Li Mingbo hadn't shown up once. His mother's expression shifted to worry, fearing he had fled, but Yang simply smiled and took the phone, confident the man wasn't going anywhere. He casually mentioned that he had broken the man's leg the previous night, so he was likely in a hospital bed waiting to be picked up. His father cried out in shock, asking when he could have possibly done that since he was supposed to be asleep. Yang just rolled his eyes. He joked that with all the commotion, only his father could have slept through it, prompting a grumpy retort about discipline before the line went dead. A few minutes later, the confirmation came. Li Mingbo was indeed lying in the orthopedic ward. It seems everything was falling into place. A single photograph, buried for 10 years, had become the key evidence, yet Yang knew that breaking a man like Li Mingbo required a personal touch. After so much time, one photo might not be enough for a total conviction, but that didn't matter as he made his way to the hospital. Li Mingbo was now a bird in a cage, unable to fly away, lying in his hospital bed with his left leg encased in a heavy plaster cast. The man looked sullen, convinced that no real evidence could be found, yet the mere thought of Yi Yang's young face filled him with pure hatred. He told himself that breaking his leg wouldn't give the boy enough time to investigate, thinking it was all just a desperate, foolish dream. He had been safe for 10 years, and he believed that while the boy had strength, he lacked the brains to truly outsmart a veteran like him. A sinister smile began to spread across his face. In the vast city of Kyoto, he was a small player, yet he was the one who had once plunged the entire city into a state of absolute terror. He was confident and arrogant as he checked the time, 3 in the afternoon. With only 2 hours left until his deadline with Yang, he wondered if the boy would actually bring the police. He couldn't help but sneer. But before that smile could even fade, the ward door was suddenly thrown open, and 8 officers rushed in, pointing their weapons directly at him. Li Mingbo was utterly stunned, staring blankly as he tried to speak, but a nameless panic seized him when he saw Yi Yang step out from behind the officers. He demanded to know why Yi Yang had brought so many police, but the young man simply glanced at him and told the officers to close the door. Once the door was shut, Yi Yang calmly stated that since the suspect tried to escape, he was forced to break the man's other leg. As those words hung in the air, Yi Yang stepped forward. The man's face turned pale as a fist descended, followed by a piercing scream. He was formally accused of the 2007 murders of Li Yuling, Huang Ye, Zhang Yuhuan, Xiao Dajiang, and 6 others. This was the arrest warrant. Yi Yang held the warrant before his eyes. Though the man was trembling with pain, his gaze remained fixed, insisting that this was impossible. He roared, demanding to know what evidence they had to arrest him. Yi Yang simply asked if he remembered the photo Xiao Dajiang had taken. The man's face went white with horror for several seconds, his lips trembling without a single word coming out. It seems the memory had returned. Yi Yang noted that his effort to dig the photo out of the man's coffin hadn't been in vain, and he finally presented the evidence to Li Mingbo. He mockingly asked if the man had a twin brother, and when Li Mingbo tried to grab the photo, he found he no longer had the chance. Yi Yang asked if he still believed his intellect surpassed everyone else's, or if his methods could truly outsmart every criminal investigator. He told Li Mingbo he had been careless. After hiring a terminally ill driver to kill Xiao Dajiang 10 years ago, he should have finished the job. By failing to destroy this key evidence, he had proven himself a failed criminal. Yi Yang's voice was cold, leaving the man deflated on the bed. The man muttered in disbelief that the photo had been buried for 10 years, yet Yi Yang had actually managed to dig it up from the grave. Yi Yang stared at him, asking why Xiao Dajiang hadn't stopped him from killing Zhang Yuhuan that night, choosing to take a photo instead. This was the one detail that truly puzzled him, as no man would calmly take photos while watching his own girlfriend being murdered. Li Mingbo remained silent, closing his eyes as though retreating inward. Yi Yang, sensing his thoughts, asked if he was already calculating how to escape conviction. He warned the man not to bother, for as long as he was there would be no escape. Li Mingbo opened his eyes and asked a strangely unrelated question. He asked if Yi Yang was truly only 17. The young man paused, touching his own face with a small smile, and simply asked what the man thought. The killer gritted his teeth, insisting that such intellect and schemes couldn't possibly belong to a mere boy. Yi Yang smiled. To him, that didn't matter. What mattered was the answer. He pointed out that since he had scratched the man's itch by finding the truth, it was time for the man to return the favor. With a long, pained sigh, Li Mingbo admitted he never understood Xiao Dajiang's actions that night, only that the man had sought him out later. It seemed Xiao Dajiang and Zhang Yuhuan had an irreconcilable conflict. At the time, a mall manager was also pursuing her. When the attack happened, she was actually on the phone with that other man. Perhaps Xiao Dajiang felt a flicker of hatred, or perhaps it was simply a matter of money. Despite being a security captain, his salary was low. He likely saw the murder as a golden opportunity to extort a small fortune for himself. It was also possible he only took the photo after the deed was done. There was only one shot, a chilling image of the killer sitting beside the body. Yi-young began to understand. In the end, only the dead man knew his own heart. Love and jealousy have a way of blinding even the best of us. Turning back to the killer, Yi-young asked if he truly murdered 9 people just because his son died in an elevator accident. It seemed a stretch. At that moment, a ferocious light flickered in Li Mingbo's eyes. He whispered that Li Yuling, the first victim, had been standing right next to his son. She had been fast enough to run to safety. He snarled, wondering why she was so selfish that she couldn't have reached out to pull his son along. He believed she had more than enough time. Then there was Huang Ya. That woman had been standing right next to the emergency stop button. He couldn't fathom why she didn't just press it. In his mind, their stupidity and panic were the true reasons his son was dead. A convenient logic, really. He roared like a cornered beast, but Yi-young merely shook his head. He claimed to understand the killer's psychology better than the man did himself. It truly began with hatred, but eventually, he found that killing was addictive, just like smoking or even drugs. How could he have let it come to this? The man was horrified that his inner darkness had been read so easily. Yi-young let out a quiet breath and turned to leave as the officers moved in to secure the suspect. Li Mingbo screamed after him, demanding to know who he really was. Without looking back, Yi-young replied that he was just someone who knew him far too well. Yi-young explained that eventually, the revenge for his son became a mere excuse. Deep down, he knew those girls were innocent, or at the very least, their mistakes didn't warrant death. But he simply couldn't control himself anymore, and since the authorities couldn't find a trace of him, he grew bolder. He began to crave the look of terror on their faces and the touch of their cold bodies. Having laid bare the killer's soul, Yi-young turned away. He walked out the door, leaving Li Mingbo staring blankly at his retreating back, utterly speechless. He was right. By the time the man killed Huang Ya, the hatred had already vanished, replaced by a dark addiction. Soon after, Li Mingbo was dragged away in handcuffs, his broken legs trailing behind him. Standing outside the ward, Yi-young called his father to check if the arrangements for the driver's family were complete. They were ready to testify. His father's voice was soft, filled with a pride he couldn't quite hide. He invited his son to the press conference that evening, hoping he would attend. Yi-young simply pursed his lips, having no interest in the spotlight. Now that the case was closed, he was no longer part of the system. He was just a student. His father laughed, agreeing that he was indeed still a student, and promised him a grand gift for the honor he'd brought the family. It was a fair deal. Yi-young teased that it would depend on the gift itself before hanging up. With nothing left to do, he returned to the Yi residence to rest. The family cook, Mother Wang, immediately tried to fuss over him with food, but he politely declined and turned on the television instead. By evening, almost every channel in Kyoto was broadcasting the same breaking news. The serial murder case that had haunted the city for a decade had finally been solved. The suspect had been apprehended at the orthopedic hospital at 3:42 p.m., bringing a long nightmare to a definitive end. The reports clarified that while the recent murders mirrored the old cases, they were the work of different killers. Both mysteries were now unraveled. The news also mentioned that, alongside the police, an anonymous young man surnamed Yi had played the most critical role in solving both cases. Watching the report, Yi-young wasn't surprised that some information had leaked. After all, it is quite difficult to remain completely invisible. Suddenly, his mother called. He wondered if something was wrong, only to find that Xiao Dajian's elderly mother had come to see her. The old woman's voice came through the line, thanking the young master Yi for his kindness, though she felt her son didn't deserve such grace. She apologized for having hidden the truth earlier, her voice heavy with regret. Yi-young simply smiled, his expression calm and forgiving. He told her there was no need for apologies. They would bury her son where he lay. It was a fitting end for a man who had earned his fate. Yi-young told her that he wasn't one to do favors for no reason. The world is full of people in need, and there was no point in helping someone who might not deserve it. He had only acted because he had given his word to her, and since she no longer required it, he was happy to let the matter rest. He then hung up and returned to the television. We see that it was nearly 10 in the evening by the time his parents finally returned home. As soon as they walked in, his mother called him out of his room, excited for what was next. She told him his father had a gift for him. To be honest, Yi-young hadn't expected his father to be serious, and he looked at them with genuine surprise, wondering if the offer was real. His father laughed heartily and clapped him on the shoulder. He asked if Yi-young had seen Zhao Qingyang's face in the office earlier. The man looked as if he had swallowed a fly. It was a satisfying sight, and since Yi-young had become the greatest contributor to both the family and the entire security system, a grand reward was absolutely necessary. Yi-young told them to stop the mystery and just show him the gift, but after waiting a moment, he noticed his parents hadn't moved an inch, nor was there a box on the table. His mother smiled brightly and revealed the surprise. His father had arranged for him to graduate high school early and start at the Kyoto Police Academy next semester. Yi-young was completely stunned. At first, the idea of skipping his senior year of high school felt like a victory, but he soon realized he was simply being moved from one oven to another. Seeing his son's hesitation, his father explained that the Kyoto Police Academy was the highest-ranking security institution in the entire country, a place of true prestige. He told him that the people who studied there were of a different caliber entirely. He suggested that the students there were quite interesting and worth meeting. Yi-Yong had to admit, the idea of interesting people caught his attention for a moment. The top graduates from that academy usually rose to high positions, but many also whispered that the brightest students there were essentially geniuses of crime in another life. If such people ever turned to the dark side, they would leave the security system in total chaos. Suddenly, Yi-Yong found himself feeling a spark of genuine interest. In this world, he lacked neither money nor influence. He was usually the one in control, and no one dared to truly cross him. A life of just eating and sleeping was becoming dull. The recent murder cases had provided a much-needed distraction, especially since they involved his family. It was time for a change of pace, he decided. He agreed to give the Kyoto Police Academy a try. His mother was overjoyed, immediately declaring that she would start preparing everything he needed for the upcoming semester. Yi-Yong felt a bead of sweat drop down his forehead. He reminded her, quite reasonably, that the next semester was still a full month away and there was no need to rush. Meanwhile, news of the decade-old serial murder case being solved continued to echo through the streets of Kyoto. The mysterious young man surnamed Yi was becoming a legend. In every corner of the city, people were turning him into a myth, a natural-born genius of deduction and a world-class master of criminal investigation. Some of the more imaginative citizens even claimed that the young hero wasn't named Yi at all, but was actually the legendary detective D. Renji reborn. We see the absurdity of these rumors, but as time passed, the busy public naturally began to move on from the case, until a new spark ignited. Half a month later, when Li Mingbo and Wang Wei appeared in court, the headlines caused another sensation, though Yi Yang's mind was already elsewhere. He spent his time browsing for information on the Kyoto Police Academy, but unfortunately, details online were incredibly scarce. To be honest, it was quite mysterious. It seemed the school was being deliberately protected from the public eye. In fact, he hadn't even known it existed until his father mentioned it. Every summer, the academy sends invitations to carefully selected students, ranging from the children of prestigious families to those from more humble backgrounds. The common thread was that they all possessed the raw potential to become elite security officers or high-ranking officials in the future. As the semester approached, Yi-Yong finally received his official invitation. His father had insisted on waiting for it rather than using the family's influence. When the letter arrived, his father laughed with pride, noting that those old men at the academy hadn't gone senile after all. After Yi-Yong had solved 2 major cases, it would have been a crime if they hadn't invited him. And so, the family waited in joyful anticipation. The new semester finally arrived, and we see his mother busily preparing a mountain of bags filled with clothes, supplies, and everything in between. Yi-Yong looked at the pile of luggage with a slight headache, reminding her that the academy was only a 30-minute drive away. He wasn't exactly traveling across the world, but his mother paid him no mind as she pointed out a bag filled entirely with clothes. Another bag was for shoes, and a third was packed with every possible medicine he might need. Then, she handed him a bank card. She promised to check the balance regularly and add more funds whenever it ran low. He took the card with a wry, slightly amused smile. She claimed it wasn't much, only 100,000, which made Yi Yang's eye twitch. After all, he was only a 17-year-old student. Having a 6-figure allowance with no limits was, in any normal situation, quite excessive. But such was the reality of the Yi family's resources. He sighed at his mother's overprotectiveness, though he quietly tucked the card into his pocket. It was a luxury he wasn't about to argue with. He promised to call her before the money ran out, but suddenly, his mother became quite sentimental about him leaving for the dormitory. She urged him to take care of himself, eat on time, and get plenty of rest. He listened patiently as he picked up his things. He picked up his suitcases, joking that he'd surely gain a few pounds by the time the holidays rolled around, before leaving home to catch a bus. His destination was the Kyoto Police Academy, an institution that sends highly specialized graduates all across the country every single year. For students who dream of a career in law enforcement, this place is a sacred ground, a paradise they strive desperately to enter. As the holidays ended, the campus gradually came to life, seemingly filled with the vibrant energy of youth and ambitious dreams. It felt like a place where no darkness should exist. Meanwhile, on the roof of a 7-story dormitory, 2 months of silence remained unbroken. The wind whistled across the rooftop, making the metal fixtures rattle and clang with a hollow, rhythmic sound against the iron sheets. A heavy iron door seemed to isolate the roof from the floors below, and to be honest, no one really knew what it looked like up there. The only landmark was a water tower, which, with the start of the semester, was expected to resume its daily task of storing and releasing water. However, after 2 months of disuse and a loose valve, the tower was bone dry, lacking even a single drop of water. Instead, several small things were constantly bumping against the iron walls with a dull thud, not loud, but noticeable if one listened closely. If you were to press your ear against the metal, you'd hear the frantic squeaking of living creatures trapped inside that dark space. It was likely just a few rats, nothing more. Meanwhile, Yi-Yong arrived at the academy gates, where specialized security stood at rigid attention. Their hawk-like gaze alone proved this wasn't an ordinary school. Interestingly, the academy had a very wide range of student ages. Some were 25 or 6, while others were as young as 14. In this environment, the older students often felt a strange sense of humility. The younger ones, naturally, felt a bit superior, though the academy remained a comprehensive school focused on building future legends of the system. Of course, subjects like physics and chemistry were still mandatory. As he approached the entrance, a guard immediately held up a hand to stop him. The guard requested his admission letter, which Yiyang pulled from his bag. At Kyoto, parents weren't allowed inside, even on the first day. Any student still accompanied by their parents would surely be mocked. After the security check, the guard stepped aside to let him through. He offered a polite thank you and headed to the admissions office to register and receive his dormitory keys, finishing the process quickly. The accommodations were quite good, with 3 students per room and individual beds. When he entered, his roommates hadn't arrived yet. He set his things down and spent some time quietly on his phone. Before long, the door opened and a young man in his early 20s walked in. He had a buzz cut and was shorter than Yiyang, but built quite solidly. He froze for a moment upon seeing him, asking if he was also assigned to this room. Yiyang nodded, leaving the newcomer even more shocked. It seemed the legends about the academy were true. Age really didn't matter here. The young man remarked that Yiyang looked 18 at most. Having just turned 17, Yiyang agreed 18 was close enough, prompting a cry of genius. The man was clearly impressed, introducing himself as Zhou Chao from Beia City. Yiyang smiled and shook his hand, exchanging the usual pleasantries. Just then, the final roommate arrived, and Zhou Chao's expression shifted again. Entering the room was another young teenager wearing glasses. His clothes looked a bit worn, and while he offered a small smile to Yiyang and Zhou Chao, his eyes betrayed a certain shyness. He introduced himself as Li Duo with a slight stutter. Yiyang and Zhou Chao gave their names in return, though Zhou Chao was already curious about his age. It seemed this was a pressing issue for him. When Li Duo replied he was 19, Zhou Chao lamented how unfair the talent gap felt. In a room of 3, one was 17 and another 19. At 21, Zhou Chao joked he felt out of place among such young elites. Yiyang gave a small hum of acknowledgement. Zhou Chao grinned, noting that this place was going to be a lot of fun, an opinion Yiyang found surprising. It turned out they shared the same mindset. They were here to enjoy the experience. After chatting, the 3 decided to head to the cafeteria. Since this would be their source of food for the entire semester, it was a high priority. Fortunately, the academy's cafeteria wasn't a total disaster. The food was actually quite good, leaving Li Duo and Zhou Chao grinning and full of praise. However, the good impression didn't last long once they returned. To their dismay, the dormitory had no running water. Even with the air conditioning on, Li Duo felt sticky and uncomfortable without a shower. After waiting a while, he suggested they go downstairs to ask the dorm manager when the water would return. Yiyang and Zhou Chao readily agreed. On a hot day like this, being unable to bathe was a genuine hardship. As they headed down, they found a large crowd already questioning the manager. Faced with the clamor of voices, the manager picked up a megaphone and urged the students to be patient, explaining she had only just arrived herself. She reported that the water tower on the roof was likely broken from disuse. Unfortunately, it was too late for repairs, and a technician would only arrive tomorrow. The news was met with groans. Waiting until tomorrow meant they would all end up smelling like salted fish by morning. And who could blame their frustration? As the students continued to shout and the manager struggled to keep up, Li Duo let out a heavy sigh and suggested they simply head back to the dorm for the night. Li Duo noted that they would just have to make do for one evening. But suddenly, Zhou Chao was struck by a rather unexpected idea regarding that broken water tower.